Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel DocuC, where we explain complex ophthalmology topics in a more simpler manner. Today's topic is anatomy of oculomotor nerve. Now firstly we'll see that this nerve is a motor nerve which supplies all the extraocular muscles of the eye except the superior oblique and the lateral rectus, and also the two intraocular muscles, the sphincter pupillae and the ciliary muscles. So now we'll come to the motor nuclei. There are two motor nuclei of the oculomotor nerve. Firstly is the main motor nuclei and the second is the accessory parasympathetic nuclei. The main motor nuclei is situated in the anterior part of the gray matter at the level of superior colliculus. Now, there has been several attempts that have been made to group the multipolar cells within the motor nucleus into subgroups according to the muscles that they supply. Now, this has not been very definite, but just for theoretical purposes, we'll look into it. Now, firstly, we'll see the first group would be the dorsolateral group, which supplies the inferior rectus. Then comes the intermediate group, which supplies the inferior oblique. Then the paramedian, which supplies the superior rectus. Then ventromedial, which supplies the medial rectus. And then there's central caudal, which supplies the levator palpebral superioris. Now, to note here, except the superior rectus and the LPS, all these three groups are supplied by their respective side. So, suppose this is the left side, so this supplies the left inferior rectus. This would supply the right inferior rectus. But in case of superior rectus, it will supply the contralateral. So that means the left will supply the right and the right will supply the left. And in case of LPS, this one group supplies bilaterally. Another point to remember about the main motor nucleus would be that it receives three sets of fibers. So, firstly, would be the from the cerebral cortex. So, it will get corticonuclear fibers from the cerebral hemispheres. The other one would be from the superior colliculus, which would be the tectobulbar fibers. And then the third would be the MLF, the medial longitudinal fibers, which helps it to connect this particular nuclei to the nucleus of fourth, sixth, and eighth cranial nerve. So this is another point to remember about the main motor nuclei. Now we'll come to the accessory parasympathetic nuclei, which is also known as the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So in terms of anatomy, it is situated posterior to the main motor nuclei, and the axons of the nerve cells, they accompany the other oculomotor fibers into the orbit. So suppose this is the main motor nucleus, this is the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Now it will come along with the oculomotor nerve fibers, follow its course, and within the orbit, it will synapse in the ciliary ganglion. Now we'll have a separate video about ciliary ganglion, but for now, we'll remember the ganglion situated within the orbit. The fibers coming from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus along with the oculomotor fibers will synapse in the ciliary ganglion. From here, postganglionic fibers will come out, and then within the short ciliary nerve, it will travel and then supply to the sphincter muscle and the ciliary muscles. So this is the main anatomy regarding the accessory parasympathetic nuclei or the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So in order to understand the course of this particular nerve, we'll divide the entire course into four parts. First being the fascicular. That means within the brain matter. Then it would be basilar. Basilar means when it comes out from the hemispheres. Then intracranial, that means when it travels within the cranium. And then finally when it reaches the orbit. Now coming to the first part, that is the fascicular. So within the fascicular, we will see that oculomotor nerve emerges from the main motor nuclei. As discussed previously, this you can see it emerges from the main motor nuclei, accompanied by the axons that come out of the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. This yellow part is the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Now it passes through the red nucleus. This is the red nucleus. And all of this is happening in the midbrain at the level of superior colliculus. So here is the superior colliculus. So in the midbrain at the level of superior colliculus. Now it passes through the red nucleus within the cerebral peduncle and then emerges out into the cranium. So now we need to remember two things. When there is some sort of pathology within the red nucleus, that may affect the oculomotor nerve, then that particular syndrome is called as Benedict syndrome. And when it is emerging out of the cerebral peduncle and the pathology is at the cerebral peduncle within its course, then that particular syndrome would be called Weber's syndrome. Moving on to the basilar part. Now, the basilar part is basically when it emerges out of the cerebral peduncle. So, it is at that time, it is divided into the medial and lateral rootlets. Rootlets. So, as it is emerging out of the cerebral peduncle, these rootlets kind of twist around each other and then fuses to form a flat nerve. That is the basilar part. Let's do a recap. So, till now, we studied the fascicular and the basilar part. Fascicular part being when it emerges from the third motor nuclei and along with the parasympathetic accessory nucleus, passes through the red nucleus, emerges out of the cerebral peduncle, and then it the rootlets kind of twist upon each other to form a flat third nerve. Now, the intracranial part. Now, it is emerged out of the cerebral peduncle and it's within the cranium. So, now as it emerges out, it passes between two important arteries, first being the posterior cerebral artery, and then second being the superior cerebellar artery. Posterior cerebral artery and superior cerebellar artery. As you can see in the diagram, it passes between these two major vessels of the circle of Willis. As it emerges out, it then kind of goes off laterally and for a short distance travels parallel to the posterior communicating artery. Okay? Again, we'll see once again. As it emerges out of the cerebral hemisphere, it travels between posterior cerebral artery and superior cerebellar artery. Then it turns to the lateral side and travels short distance parallel to the posterior communicating artery. Now, the important thing here is to note that since it's passing between two arteries, any kind of aneurysm can cause its compression. So, suppose this is the nerve that we're talking about. So, any kind of aneurysm of these two vessels can cause compression. In this kind of third nerve palsy, it will be pupil involving. Why? Because the pupillary fibers are present superficially within the nerves. So, therefore, when there is aneurysm, there's compression of the superficial part first and then the middle part. So, therefore, this will be a pupil involving third nerve palsy. Whereas in case of diabetes, the first fibers to be affected is in the center. So, when in case of diabetes or hypertension, it is pupil sparing. So, this is an important point to note. Now, after traveling parallel to the posterior communicating artery, it reaches the cavernous sinus. It pierces the wall and laterally it lies above the fourth cranial nerve. So now we'll just have a quick view of what the cavernous sinus is. Now it is a sinus that lies laterally to the sphenoid sinus and it consists of few important structures. Firstly, we'll see the five nerves, the five important cranial nerves it has. So technically it is in the wall of the cavernous sinus. It lies lateral to the cavernous sinus. The first nerve we'll see would be the one that we're talking about, the third nerve or the oculomotor nerve. Other than that, right below the oculomotor nerve is the trochlear nerve or the fourth cranial nerve. Below that is the first division or the ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve. Below that is the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve. Now, there are only two structures within the cavernous sinus. First being the internal carotid artery, and right lateral to it would be the sixth cranial nerve or the abducens nerve. Now, any kind of pathology that may occur within the cavernous sinus or around the cavernous sinus can involve pathologies of all these structures and the cranial nerves, and therefore its palsies. Now, as the nerve traverses the cavernous sinus, it enters the orbit. So now we're discussing the intraorbital course of third cranial nerve. Upon entering the orbit, it divides into two branches, the superior branch and the inferior branch. Now, superior branch gives supply to the superior rectus and then terminates by supplying to the levator palpebral superioris. The inferior branch gives supply to inferior oblique, inferior rectus, and medial rectus. Now, one thing to remember about nerve to inferior oblique is that it gives a short branch consisting of the parasympathetic fibers. Now, these are the preganglionic fibers, and then they synapse in the ciliary ganglion. Once it synapses in the ciliary ganglion, the postganglionic fibers come out, and via short ciliary nerve, they supply the iris, sphincter pupillae, and ciliary muscles. So, therefore, all in all, oculomotor nerve is supplying the superior rectus, levator palpebral superioris, inferior oblique, inferior rectus, medial rectus, as well as parasympathetic supply to sphincter pupillae and ciliary muscles. So that will be all for this video. Hopefully, this video helped you understand this complex yet very important ocular nerve a little better and added to your knowledge. I will be posting more videos regarding the oculomotor nerve palsy and the various syndromes that it is associated with. Thank you.